Leviathan, Chapter 6. The second broadside of cannon shells fell closer. A spray of gravel and wooden splinters rattled against the viewport's grill, the smaller pieces spilling through. Alec spat dirt from his mouth. "Vision to half," Master Klopp cried. "Then cursed!" The two crewmen were below, and Vulgar was halfway through the hatch again, his legs dangling from the ceiling. Klopp glanced apologetically at Alec. "If you please, your highness." "Certainly, Master Klopp," Alec said. He unbuckled and pulled himself up from the commander's chair. The cabin rocked and swayed, and he gasped the straps overhead to keep his footing. He tried to turn the viewport's crank, but it wouldn't budge. Taking it with both hands, Alec strained harder until the massive armored visor grudgingly closed a few centimeters. Another broadside shook the earth beneath them, and the walkers staggered forward. Count Vulgar's riding boots flailed, kicking Alec in the back of his head. "They can still see us," Vulgar shouted from above. "We're too tall." Master Klopp twisted at the saunters, hunkering the stormwalker lower. The hornbeam trees rose up in the viewport, the walker's clumsy gait sending Vulgar's boots swinging again. For an astonishing moment, Alec watched Klopp's hands on the controls. He'd never seen a walker shuffle along a crouch like this. Of course, he'd never imagined a Cyclops stormwalker having to hide from anything. But again, against the dreadnought, this walker was practically a toy. Grunting and heaving, Alec managed to close the right viewport to half. He reached for the other crank. "Young master, the antenna!" Cluck cried. "Yes, of course." The Stormwalker's wireless antenna stretched up above the trees, the archducal flag snapping in the breeze. But Alec had no idea how to lower it. He looked around the cabin, wishing he'd paid more attention to the crewmen and learning how than when he was learning how to pilot. Finally, he spotted the windlass beside the wireless set. As he darted for it, Vulgar's dangling boots delivered another blow to his shoulder. The windlass spun wildly the moment Alec unlocked it, the antenna telescoping closely a few centimeters from his ears. He started back for the commander's seat, then saw that the left viewport was still open. He reached across the lurching cabin and began to crank it tighter. Vulgar dropped back into the cabin, closing the hatch above him against the sudden rain of dirt and pebbles. "We're out of sight now." Another broadside rumbled in the distance, followed by more explosions, flickering among the trees ahead. Debris struck the stormwalker, but the viewport's grill was squeezed as tight as a comb's teeth now, only to the fine dust of pulverizing forest floor filtered through. Alec felt a moment of satisfaction. He'd done something useful. This was the first real battle, when only hours before he'd been playing with tin soldiers. The rubble of explosions and the shriek of engines somehow filled the hollowness inside him. The stormwalker was thrashing through dense forest now. Of course, any clear path would be clearly visible from the Bay Wolf's lookout towers. Alec's heart was beating fast as he slipped back into the commander's chair and watched Klopp's hands on the saunters. His long hours of piloting practice seemed suddenly trifle. All that time in runabouts had been pretended play, and this was real. Vulgar crouched between the chairs to peer forward, his face blackened with dirt and sweat. Blood followed from the scratch above his eye, shining bright red in the gloom of the shuttered cabin. "I believe I suggested a smaller land ship, Master Klopp." Klopp barked a laugh, still struggling to keep the stormwalker low to the ground. "Don't appreciate the extra armor, Vulgar?" A runabout would have been blown off her feet by the last broadside. The forest rumbled again, but the explosions came from well beyond, behind and off to the right. The dreadnought had lost sight of them for now. The sun was rising behind the Beowulf. So we're headed west, Alec said. We should turn left. The pines and firs down in the south are much taller than these hornbeams. Well remembered, your highness, Master Klopp said, adjusting his course. Alec clapped him on the shoulder. You were right to choose the Stormwalker, Klopp. We'd be dead now otherwise. We'd be halfway to Switzerland, you mean, Vulgar said, managing to sound as if this was some fencing lesson that Alec had failed to comprehend. In a roundabout half this size, or on horses, they wouldn't have spotted us in the first place. Imagined, Alec glared up in the wild count. But before he could open his mouth, the intercom popped. Loaded and ready, sir. Alec dropped his gaze toward the cabin floor. Those two would have been more use up here. There's not much they can do with the pea shooter against the dreadnought. True, your highness, Klopp said, but she'll have escorts. Smaller, faster ships moving below tree height. We may get a whiff of them sooner than you think. Ah, quite right. Alec closed his mouth and swallowed. The rush of battle was beginning to fade, and his hands were shaking. All he'd done was turn a few cranks. The others had handled everything else important. The bruises left by Vulgar swinging boots still throbbed, reminders of how Alec had mostly managed to get in the way. He leaned back into the commander's chair as the simple, overwhelming fear of being shot had faded. The emptiness was rushing back. Alec wished that it were him bleeding instead of Vulgar, anything to distract himself from the truth welling in his mind. She's lost our range, Klopp said. No big guns for account of thirsty. They've turned to give chase, Vulgar said. But wait till their scouts spot us. She'll swing around for another broadside soon enough. Alec cast about for something to say, but found himself in the grip of a silent panic. His vision blurred with tears. The attack had swept away his last doubts. His father was dead. His mother, too, both gone forever. His Serene Highness, Prince Alexander of Hohenberg, was alone now. He might never see his home again. The armed forces of two empires were hunting him, set against one walker and four men. Vulgar and Klopp fell silent, and when Alec turned, he saw his despair reflected in their faces. He clenched the handrest of the commander's chair, fighting to breathe. His father would have known what to say in this situation, a short and forceful speech, praising the men for their efforts, urging them to carry on, but Alec could only stare into the forest, blinking away tears. If he didn't say something, the emptiness would swallow him. A burst of gunfire broke out in the trees ahead, cutting through the grind of the engines. The walker twisted to a new heading, and Count Vulgar jumped to his feet again. Horse scouts, I reckon, Master Klopp said. They have stables on the Beowulf. A shower of bullets rattled against the Stormwalker's visor, louder than any spray or dirt and pebbles. Alec imagined metal projectiles ripping through the armor and cutting into him, and his heart began to race again. The awful emptiness lifted a little. A huge boom shook the walker in its track, and a bellow of smoke rose across the viewport. Its choking stench spilling into the cabin. For a moment, Alec thought they'd been hit, but then the explosion answered from the distance, followed by the crack of trees and the awful cries of horses. That was us, he murmured. The men below had fired the Stormwalker's cannon. As the echo died, Vogler called, "Do you know how to load a Spandu machine gun, Alec?" Prince Alexander knew nothing of the sort, but already his hands were moving to unbuckle his seat straps. Okay, we're going to go on to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is about Darren. So, total new setting. They were just beginning to reel in Darren when the storm struck. The ground men had noticed a darkening sky. They were scrambling about the field, scurrying the hangar tent with extra spikes, getting the recruits under cover. 4 men strained at the ascenders, winch, pulling Darren down, steady and fast. A dozen ground crew waited to grab the beast's tentacles when it was low enough. But she was still 500 feet up when the first sheets of rain arrived. The cold drops fell diagonally, hitting her dangling feet even under the cover of the airbrush. The tentacles coiled tighter, and she wondered how long the Medusa would take this pounding before it spilled its hydrogen, hurling itself toward the ground. "Stay calm, beastie," Darren said softly. They're bringing us in. They're bringing us in." A wild gust caught the Medusa's airbag, and it bellowed like a full sail. Darren swung out into full force of the storm, her boy slops instantly soaked with freezing rain. Then the cable snapped taut, whipping the beast earthward like a kite without enough string. It dropped toward houses and backyard gardens, down to just above the high prison walls. Directly beneath Darren, people scurried along the wet streets, shoulders hunched, unaware of the monster overhead. Another gust of wind struck, and the Hexley was forced low enough that Darren could see the ribs of umbrellas below. "Oh, beastie, this isn't good." The Medusa swelled again, trying to regain its lift, and leveled off a few dozen feet above the rooftops. The cables strained against the wind for a moment, then loosened. The ground men were giving them slack. Darren reckoned letting them climb a bit more, like a fisherman trying to keep the catch on his line. But the extra cable was more weight to carry, and she and the Huxley were both heavy with rain. She could spill the water ballast, but once it was gone, there'd be nothing left to slow their fall if the beastie panicked. The cable was scraping across the prison rooftops now, snapping against the shingles and drain pipes. Darren saw it snag on one of the smoky chimneys, and her eyes just widened. No wonder the ground men were letting out more cable, but they were keeping her away from the prison. If a chimney spark drifted up and reached the Huxley airbags, the hydrogen would ignite the ascender, exploding in a massive fireball, rain or no rain. The cable snagging again, sending the jolt through the Huxley. The creature spooked, its tentacles coiling tighter and dropping again. Darren clenched the ballast cord, gritting her teeth. She might survive a wind-tossed landing herself, but the shingle rooftops and backyard fences below would shred the creature to pieces, and it would be all Darren Sharp's fault for not warning the ground men when she'd had the chance. Some air sense. "Okay, beastie," she called up. "I may have got you into this mess, but I'm going to get you out too. And I'm telling you,